We have these new details coming from Senate Finance Republicans about what's going to be in the bill. Did they consult with Democrats on the committee at all?
We've heard nothing. This has been so frustrating. I was part of the gang of six that dealt with the Simpson-Bowles plan. I've had a career in business, yet we've had no consultation. This plan has been written totally in the dark, in a secret room. I think a lot of my Senate Republican finance members don't know. I think they may be being briefed right now, even as we speak. But this is not the way you should rework our country's tax code.
Senator, some Democrats have met with the White House earlier this week. Senator Joe Manchin arranging a meeting with Gary Cohn, with Mark Short of the White House. They're trying to, some Republicans are saying they want to get centrist Democrats on board. What do you make of that argument?
I make that, as somebody who's spent a career in business longer than I have in politics, I've not really had any outreach, but I also feel like there's a bit of a scam going on here. You've got the whole premise of let's add literally trillions of dollars to the debt at this point. As somebody who is very concerned about our aggregate debt, it's already $20 trillion. I worry that they're using all kinds of tricks with baselines. They're making some of the corporate cuts permanent. The personal help for middle class is only for 5 years. This is at least in the House bill. That's not exactly the right way to do it. And I saw, Alan Greenspan, somebody I've got a lot of respect for today, pointed out the obvious fact that when you're close to full employment, doing a tax cut with borrowed money is really not good policy. So I've been very, very disappointed by their whole approach.
But on the issue of lowering the corporate tax rates, several centrist Democrats in the past, senators, have suggested that might be something they'd be willing to get on board with. According to the framework released by the Senate Finance Republicans, they would delay that implementation until 2019, that lowering of the corporate tax rate from 35 to 20%. Is that something you could get on board with?
The idea of lowering the corporate tax rate, repatriating offshore earnings, I'm all for.
Really?
But you just got to make sure they're actually paid for. And one of the things that I've been concerned, particularly when we talk about repatriating billions of dollars of offshore money that may be in tax havens, there's no requirement for any of these companies to reinvest in America. There's no requirement for any of these companies to add additional training requirements. There's no requirement. One of the things I've looked at is if you repatriate, maybe some of the communities that have been hard hit by trade ought to get some of those supply chain jobs. Instead, what we've heard, both publicly and privately, is that a lot of corporations are talking about using these dollars for stock buybacks, additional dividends, or additional executive comp. That net is not going to help grow the economy.
You raised an interesting point about requiring a lot of these repatriated funds to be utilized somehow back in the economy. Is that when infrastructure starts to get tied into this?
But there's no linkage at this point. I mean, if there is, what's remarkable about the bill, at least in the House, because that's the one we've taken a look at. They didn't take on carried interest, and I've benefited from carried interest. Let me be clear in my business career. But they did take on getting rid of the adoption tax credit. They took on the ability to deduct medical expenses, eliminated that, eliminated the ability for students to deduct student debt loans. And what was really crazy is they took away abilities for businesses to use pre-tax dollars to go ahead and send their employees back to, for example, get that additional degree that might increase their earning power. To me, that's anti-growth and obviously anti-middle class.
On the issue of carried interest, the House version of the bill, Senator, would have about a three-year, they would have to keep their investments until they would be able to qualify for capital gains. Is that something that you'd be on board with?
I think something that looks at capital gains on a longer-term hold makes sense. I think
how long is long term?
That's a part we could debate. Yeah. But I think and that actually longer term on capital gains doesn't really affect the carried interest issue. That's a totally separate issue. But I am concerned that short-term pressure on the markets. That I've talked to too many CEOs that feel they're not building long-term value because that need to deliver next quarter profits. Things that we can do in that area to actually get the markets to look at a longer-term hold, I'm in favor of.
Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin up in New York today delivering a big economic address. He's saying that when the final bill is written, that millionaires are going to actually end up having to pay more taxes. You don't believe it. Looks like you don't believe him.
Listen, there's been plenty of independent analysis that shows the tax plans that have been released are all skewed for folks at the top.
So what do you need? What do Republicans on the finance? What would be a real effort from your perspective to get to say,
let's not take this dark room written agenda and let's go through the way the Congress did in 86. Let's hold hearings. Let's start a bipartisan process. I actually think it's easier to get 70 votes in the Senate and a bipartisan bill than it is to get 50 out of 52.
So you'd like to see a gang or a commission?
I'd like to see the way the Senate was supposed to work on tax reform. If there's one thing we've learned, and learn from what the Democrats' mistake. When the Democrats tried to pass health care with only one team, or did pass it with only one team, or Dodd-Frank with only one team, there was no permanency. The same thing happened when the Republicans tried to do Obamacare repeal with only one team. When you do big policy in this country, you need both parties' input.
And Senator, you're in a state, Virginia, obviously just had a big election earlier this week. A lot of political folks trying to analyze what exactly that means for the future. From your perspective, heading into the 2018 midterms, is it smart for Democrats who are up for these tough re-election fights to vote for this tax bill, or should they stay as far away from it as possible?
The problem with one of the reasons they're trying to rush this through is they don't want Americans to realize what's in it. I mean, I don't think most folks realize the adoption tax credit disappears, that student debt interest deduction disappears, that medical expenses deduction disappears, that the ability for businesses to invest in workers with pre-tax dollars.
It sounds like this is a non-starter.
I mean, if this is a great product, let's have a hearing on it. Let's have experts come in and talk about it. Let's actually look at some of the growth projections, because I've seen numbers that say whatever de minimis growth, because we're at full employment, would be outweighed by the negative aspects of taking some of the other tax provisions away.
Quickly, in the 90 seconds or so that we have left, two more questions. First of all, are you satisfied with the direction of the DNC and everything that's been had? There's been a lot of back and forth between Donna Brazile and her book. Are you satisfied with it?
The reason we won in Virginia, and we'd had a primary with a progressive and a more moderate candidate won, was we kept our eye on the ball, which is how do you win elections? You talk about jobs, you talk about plans for health care, you talk about education.
But the DNC's not rigged.
So listen, what I'm talking about is those folks who want to relitigate 2016, have at it. In Virginia, I think we've got a template that says here's how Democrats can win, not just in traditional blue areas, but what didn't get picked up as much, we picked up state house candidates in rural Southwest Virginia. And I think, this started 16 years ago when I was elected governor of Virginia. We were named best managed state, best state for business under my tenure. That kind of focus on kind of down the middle, bread and butter economic issues is where the Democratic Party ought to focus.
Senator Mark Warner, we always wish we had more time with you. Thanks for coming on Bloomberg.
Thank you.